Age of Empires 2 is about empire building, combat, and conquest. You start from humble beginnings, a small village in the Dark Ages. You explore to expand your borders, conduct trade to boost your economy, and research technologies to grow your civilization into a mighty empire. But there are difficulties too. Cunning enemies and rivals that oppose you, powerful castles to destroy, tyrants to bring down. And if you're skillful and a little lucky, you just might build a wonder of the world and create an empire that will stand the test of time. To learn how empires are built, help our first hero, William Wallace, in his fight against his oppressors.
A severed head on a pike seemed such a grisly trophy to be displayed in the chapel at Chalons. And yet it took me weeks before I got up the nerve to ask Father Armand why he kept it. The ancient priest stared out the window for a long time, recalling days gone by. "I was there," he said finally, "at the Battle of the Catalonian Fields, fighting alongside Aetius and Theodoric the Goth. I knew there had been a battle here, decades ago. Peasants still overturned skeletons and broken shields with their plows from time to time." "Who was it, Father?" I asked him. "Who were you fighting?" He turned back to regard me, paralyzing me in his old man stare. "Attila the Hun," he said, and then he told me the story. The Huns rode out from the wilderness sometime in the 400s. eager to feast on a Roman Empire weak from internal corruption and the expansion of other barbarian tribes. It was the Huns who drove many of these other barbarians before them. They were terrifying warriors from the steppes of Asia, their bodies disfigured from ritual scarring, their legs deformed from a near lifetime in the saddle. Despite their fearsome aspect, the Huns might have been little more than raiders, had it not been for the leadership of Attila. He called himself the Scourge of God. Attila and his brother Bleda led the Huns not just to raid, but to devastate Scythia and Persia. I asked Father Armand more about this legendary Attila the Hun, whom the stories always treat as more of a monster than a man. He was a man, the priest said, but he did not look like the Romans, nor did he worship the Roman god. That was the cause of all that was to follow. Father Armand shivered, as if from the cold breeze that blew in from the chapel's open windows. Kingship among the barbarians was not by divine right or lineage, but by who had the strongest will. Attila was the strongest of the Huns, and he reinforced his position by brandishing a rusty old blade and proclaiming it to be the sword of Mars, the old Roman god of war. Attila had a custom of fiercely rolling his eyes, as if he wished to enjoy the terror which he inspired. He had a power over other men, so that many chose to join him. Many foreigners joined his council, Scythians and Burgundians and Goths. Most notable among these was the son of a prominent Roman family, sent as a hostage to ensure peace between Romans and Huns. The name of this boy was Flavius Aetius, a name not soon to be forgotten. Now that the memories had stirred, Father Armand seemed eager to tell his tale. He explained how the Huns, like the other barbarians, had a style of warfare dramatically different from the ancient Romans or my own Franks. The Huns would charge as one group, often firing arrows as they came, and then suddenly retreat again. For the nations of Europe, who were used to forming up lines and columns, and even issuing challenges for personal combat, this was an aberration. They were unable to comprehend warfare in this manner. Barbarians did not conquer lands. They did not try and hold and colonize the cities they attacked. Instead, they ravaged and pillaged and took their loot back to their camps. By that time, there were two Roman empires, the government having decided that the Roman lands were simply too vast for one city to manage effectively. Attila and the Huns began a series of raids into the Eastern Empire. The Roman city of Nisus was erased from the earth. The Huns so devastated the place that when the Roman ambassadors passed through to meet with Attila, they had to camp outside the city on the river. The riverbanks were covered with human bones, and the stench of death was so great that no one could enter the city. Many cities of Europe would soon suffer the same fate. The ambassadors that the Romans sent to Attila concealed an assassination attempt. Somehow, Attila knew of the attempt on his life and sent the terrified assassin back to his emperor with the gold he had been paid to do the deed in a sack tied to his neck. Following such a demonstration, the Huns had no difficulty convincing the Eastern Roman Empire to start paying them a tribute, protection money, to stave off the inevitable Hun invasion. By this time, the Romans had considerable experience dealing with barbarians. They could civilize the raiders to some extent by offering them otherwise useless land on the Roman borders as a token tribute. Before Attila, this tactic seemed to be working on the Huns, who settled on the Danube River Valley. All that changed when Attila seized command. He was much more aggressive and unpredictable than the previous Hunnic kings. He demanded that the tributes from Rome be increased, and when the Romans refused, Attila marched on the Eastern Roman Empire. He marched on the great city of Constantinople, whose double walls had never fallen. Attila was done with raiding. Now the Huns advanced slowly, eradicating everything in their path. The Romans would reinstate the tribute, or they would be destroyed. Who was this man, I asked, to threaten the Roman emperor? Titles such as emperor meant nothing to Huns. Attila was not an appointed ruler, only the strongest among the Huns. The amenities of his office meant nothing to him. While his chieftains and council ate off of silver plates, Attila's own plate and goblet were hewn from simple wood. His Scythian guards had jewels on their sword hilts, and their cloaks were clasped with gold. But Attila showed no such affectations. He was interested only in conquest. Some said that he was trying to build a legacy to rival that of Alexander the Great. All of the barbarians wanted to possess Rome, as if it would buy them instant legitimacy as a world-spanning empire. Unlike most of the other barbarians, however, Attila was actually going to get his chance. The Western Roman Emperor had a sister named Honoria, who, after weary years of confinement to her parlor, made the preposterous decision to send a letter to Attila the Hun. She asked him to marry her. One suspects Honoria did not know what she was getting into. Attila was plentifully supplied with wives, but he immediately saw the advantage that such a union could put him in. Suddenly, his plans changed. He would not invade the Eastern Roman Empire at Constantinople, but the Western Empire at Rome. Indeed, he claimed half of the Western Empire as his dowry. Attila sent the Huns to march across the Rhine River and made alliances with the other barbarian chieftains. Some, namely the Burgundians and Ostrogoths, joined the Hun Confederation, while others, such as the Visigoths, sought to seek Roman favor by opposing the Huns. When Attila entered Gaul, what we now call France, he could claim that he merely sought by force what was his by right of betrothal to Honoria. The old priest hung his head as he related what happened next, and I could tell the weight of the memories caused him great sorrow. Attila would stop at nothing until he reached his fiancée Honoria and his goal of ruling the Roman Empire. The ravaging of Gaul was unprecedented. People were tortured, their bodies torn asunder by wild horses, or their bones crushed under the weight of rolling wagons. Their unburied limbs were abandoned on the public roads as prey to dogs. Heads on stakes stretched from Gaul clear back to the Danube River, from whence the Huns had come. They lay siege to Orléans, for Attila had learned much of siegecraft since he had faced the walls of Constantinople. But as the Huns set to their fell task, a great cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. Aetius and the Roman army had come. And now, said Father Ramond, is where I entered the story. The battle between Hun and Roman was fought at the end of June 451. The Romans were commanded by Aetius, a brilliant and celebrated general who had been held hostage by Attila when he was a boy. Aetius knew Attila and knew the Hunnic ways. Since he had returned to the Western Empire, Aetius had done more than any man to keep Rome alive throughout the period of barbarian invasions. His army was not large enough to face Attila alone, so Aetius convinced tribes of the Alans and Visigoths to ally with him. Even though these dubious allies had a common hatred of the Huns, it was still a remarkable achievement on Aetius' part to have drawn them into an effective military relationship. The Huns were eager for battle, Attila's shamans looked at the entrails of cattle and the color of sheep bones and prophesied that the Huns would meet defeat on the Catalonian fields. However, they also foresaw that the commander of the opposing force would be killed. Attila must have thought this a fair trade, because he brought battle to Aetius and the Goths. Before blood was drawn, Attila stood before his assembled troops, clutching the sword of Mars in his fist. He told them, "It is a right of nature to glut the soul with vengeance. I shall hurl the first spear at the foe. If any man can stand at rest while Attila fights, he is a dead man." It was a catastrophic battle, one of the largest and greatest the world has ever seen. The stream was turned to a torrent by the rushing of blood. I pity those that were forced to slake their thirst from it. Cadavera vero innumera, the Romans said afterwards. Truly countless bodies. Perhaps 300,000 men were left dead on the Catalonian fields. It is said the ghosts of those killed continued to fight for several days. I passed within inches of the fell Hun king as he stalked the battlefield, trying to determine which of his chieftains and allies yet lived, when he found me huddled beneath my shield. I made my peace with God, but Attila did not seek my decapitation. He saw that I was a holy man and ordered me to join his retinue of foreign advisors. "That is how you know so much of the Huns," I offered. The priest nodded. Despite the carnage, the outcome of the legendary battle was unclear. Attila had lost much of his cavalry, but the Romans' entire army was destroyed. For a time, no one knew if the Hun king would continue to pursue the hand of Honoria. "But what of the prophecy?" I asked. "Did Aetius die on the battlefield?" "Nay, it was Theodoric the Goth, not Aetius, who died and fulfilled the prophecy. Aetius knew that if he utterly destroyed the Huns, then the Visigoths would have no need for a Roman alliance, and Rome would face yet another barbarian threat. And so, Aetius retired from military life, hoping that the outcome of the Catalonian fields would leave the Huns and Goths in a stalemate, hoping that he had done enough to save his empire. He had not. As far as Attila was concerned, Honoria was waiting with open arms in Rome. The very next year, partially recovered from his losses, Attila turned his attention to Italy. The Huns crossed over the Alps and moved down the Italian peninsula, launching another great invasion that terrorized the inhabitants of the Western Roman Empire. He meant to take Rome and crown himself emperor. This was not the Rome of Caesar, mind you, but a withering Rome, beaten from earthquakes and barbarian wars. And this time, there was no General Aetius to hold off the Hun savagery. The city of Aquileia, at the tip of the Adriatic, was wiped off the face of the earth. The fugitives from that pitiful city took refuge among the islands, marshes, and lagoons at the head of the Adriatic Sea, and there founded a state that afterward grew into the Republic of Venice. But what of the Pope? I asked. No one knows what St. Leo said to the Hunnic king, but that very day, Attila turned his army around and started back for the Hun lands on the Danube. Attila the Hun died shortly thereafter. Since he had failed to claim Rome, he could not have Honoria, and instead brought another wife into his harem. On his wedding night, Attila suffered a nosebleed and choked to death. For a man who had boasted that, "Where my horse has trodden, no grass grows," it was a curiously anticlimactic death. The Hunnic warriors cut their hair and gashed their faces so that the king should be lamented, not by tears of maidens, but by the blood of warriors. Attila's bloody reign of conquest lasted only 8 long years. Father Armand was silent for a long time. He glanced over at the head on a stake. A Hunnic trophy, he said. I think the man was a Visigoth. He died at the Battle of the Catalonian Fields. I keep it here, so that I may see it every day and remember. Remember what, Father? I asked him. The scent of a burning village. The sound of butchery. The way peasants would flee before the Hun riders. The way we would ride them down. The way it felt to conquer alongside Attila and the Huns. He leaned so close, I could feel his breath. Sometimes, I miss it.
It is impossible to imagine the world ending on such a fine fall day. Yet the storm of Muslim horses continues to rage throughout Europe, leaving conquered cities and shattered armies stunned in its wake. The lightning-quick strikes of the Muslim horses break the city of Bordeaux, and then Poitiers, leaving precious little of the Frankish kingdom to defend. Yet Charles Martel gathers the disheartened Frankish army for one last stand at the city of Tours. Muslim horses, bred for speed and beauty, began to splash across the Vienne River. Martel's knights and swordsmen, trudging under the weight of iron mail, struggled to interpose themselves between the Muslims and the city of Tours. Carrion birds circle in the air, anticipating the savagery to come. The rest of Europe watches anxiously, for this is the climax of the Muslim invasion and the last stand of Christian Europe. The soul of the Frankish army was its knights, but Charles Martel knew that his cavalry, undisciplined, buried under weight of weapons and armor, could not match the swiftness of the Muslim riders. Therefore, he ordered the knights to dismount and join ranks with the Frankish swordsmen to form a tight shield wall. The Muslims had always conquered with swift offensiveness and were not equipped to counter the Franks' defensive strategy. The arrows of the Muslim archers bounced harmlessly off the heavy Frankish armor, and the light Muslim cavalry could not breach the human chain. Battered and bleeding, the Muslims broke ranks and fled back to the Pyrenees and the protection of Spain. From Charles Martel's Frankish kingdom eventually grew the Holy Roman Empire, making him the founding father of both Germany and France. In the gloom, the longhouse feels empty, but it is filled with the odors of rust and tar and animal fur and the snoring of dogs. It is the man named Eric who speaks, smacking scarred fingers together for emphasis, the steam of his breath tangling with the wood smoke. He fills the men's heads with legends of exploration and raiding, of a sea that eats longboats and an undiscovered country ripe for Viking occupation. He tells the Vikings that they can leave their frigid homeland and sail across the endless sea of worms to a new world brimming with wild grain and grapes and tall trees. To the Vikings, he speaks of paradise, and of course the grizzled Norsemen are always eager for adventure. When he asks for volunteers, men slam their weapons on tables and shout his name in the cold air. Eric the Red smiles. Much of the Viking history is recorded in oral accounts called sagas, passed down through generations. The most famous sagas are reserved for the adventures of Eric the Red and his men who crossed the mighty sea in tiny ships to forge a new Viking sovereignty. Vinland, as the New World was called, was not kind to the Vikings. Though they lacked the iron weapons of the Norsemen, the native Skraelings were fierce warriors and fought relentlessly to defend their homeland against the Norse invaders. The vastness of the North Atlantic cut off the Vikings in Newfoundland from their homeland, and they suffered many long years in trying to establish their new colony. Mercenaries and Norman knights look dubiously at the ships that wobble in the black, fog-choked sea. What man is this Duke William to put so many horses on leaky transports? William ignores their questioning glances and stares across the channel in the direction of England. Edward the Confessor is dead, and now 3 men claim rulership of England. Harold the Saxon sits on the English throne, and even now hastens to fortify his shores against 2 invasions. Harald Hardrada, king of Denmark and Norway, sends Vikings from the north, as William invades from the south. The outcome of this 3-way conflict is as murky as the fog that shrouds the English Channel. Harold the Saxon's huscarls are professional soldiers, not mercenaries. William's only chance of defeating them is to use heavy cavalry, but to do so, he must first get all of these horses onto these unreliable boats. The future of England is about to be decided. Harold the Saxon's huscarls looked certain to defend the crown for him as they fought the Vikings to a bloody stalemate at Stamford Bridge. Despite his losses, Harold marched his exhausted troops south to meet William the Conqueror near Hastings. William's archers and pikemen were no match for Harold the Saxon's veteran huscarls. Harold even broke the charge of William's knights. William himself went down in the fray, and as rumors of his death spread, the Normans turned to flee. But William was not dead, and he rallied his troops by throwing aside his helmet so they could see his clean-shaven face and know he was alive. William and his armored knights rode down the huscarls, breaking the Saxon force, and continued their ride all the way to London. William was crowned king on Christmas Day. Because his reign eventually ushered England into a position of unprecedented world leadership, the year 1066 became established as the most famous date in English history. Minarets of dust twist upwards as horse hooves strike the fractured earth. Thousands of Seljuk Turks stream across the barrens of Anatolia to converge on the walled city of Manzikert, which was recently recaptured by the Byzantium army. The Byzantines are the heirs of Rome, and their armored cataphracts and legions of disciplined swordsmen can smash aside the light-armored Turkish horse archers, provided they can catch them. But an unlikely turn of events has greatly improved the Turks' chances for victory. The Byzantine army is racked by treachery and deceit from within. One day, a band of mercenaries deserts the Byzantines. On another, the army's second-in-command leads a treacherous conspiracy against the commanding general. If the Turks can somehow turn the splintering factions against the Byzantine army, they may overcome a better equipped and better trained enemy. As long as the sun was in the sky, the Byzantine army could fight the Turks back towards their camp. But when dusk settled over Anatolia, the Turks could harass the ponderous Byzantine cavalry as it withdrew to Manzikert. When they could stand no more of this torment, the Byzantine flanks collapsed into a full rout, and the Turkish horse archers pounced for a quick kill. The Battle of Manzikert was not lost due to the poor performance of soldiers or commanders, but through Byzantine treachery. Deceit from within the armies disrupted the chain of command, as factions feuding for control of the throne in Constantinople betrayed their armies at the front. A much weakened Byzantium was then forced to call to the rest of the Christian West for help, leading to the Crusades. The Byzantine Empire lingered for another 4 centuries, but in only a shadow of its former glory.
Enough! You have troubled me for 3 blocks now, stranger. If you agree to cease this dogged pursuit and leave me to my lamentations, then I will answer your relentless questions. I will tell you why a dead man rides through the streets of Valencia. You see that castle on the hill? That is the home of Rodrigo Diaz, whom Moor and Christian alike call El Cid. It is from the Arabic Sayyid, which means Lord. He is the greatest man who ever lived. The Cid was a knight and loyal vassal of one of the old kings of Spain. When the old king died, his kingdom was partitioned between his surviving sons, Sancho and Alfonso. King Sancho ruled Castile, a windswept barren land named for its many border castles. The Cid continued to serve Castile and its new king, as was his duty. The sly King Alfonso ruled León, but openly plotted to become king of all of Christian Spain. There was soon open warfare between Castile and León. The struggle climaxed at the Battle of Golpejera, where the Cid attempted to capture the wicked Alfonso. Although the Cid defeated Alfonso's army in combat, the sly king knew there were more devious ways to win a war. Alfonso lured his brother King Sancho to a secret conference below the city walls of Zamora and had him assassinated in the night. With the death of his brother, Alfonso became king of both León and Castile, the most powerful king in Christian Spain. The Cid could not trust King Alfonso, yet he was sworn to serve his king, and that man was now Alfonso. The Cid forced King Alfonso to swear an oath upon sacred relics that he had nothing to do with Sancho's death. Before his army and his court, a nervous Alfonso did make his declaration. In so doing, the Cid helped to cement Alfonso's claim as king in the hearts of the people, for they so trusted the Cid. King Alfonso did not recognize that the Cid had done him a service. Instead, Alfonso held a grudge against the man who was the greatest of his knights for ever doubting him. Alfonso also was jealous and suspicious of the Cid's popularity with the soldiers and the common man. He sent the Cid into dangerous battle again and again, but always the Cid emerged victorious. How do I know so much of my Cid, Rodrigo Diaz? I am Jimena of Asturias, and I am the dona of this castle. Rodrigo and I were married in Castile in 1075. Those were among the happiest days of my life, at least when my husband was not being sent to do battle against the Moors. Far to the east in the Holy Land, they speak of only one Muslim expansion, that of the Seljuk Turks. But here in Spain we speak of another, the Moors. The Moors ruled southern Spain for so long that Christian and Muslim often lived side by side with little animosity. Such was the case in the city of Toledo, which was in Moorish lands but inhabited by Christians as well. A political assassination had plunged the city of Toledo into a civil war. Seeing a chance to expand his empire, King Alfonso struck at Toledo under the pretense of restoring order. He ordered the Cid to command the army, though one must wonder if once again he was intentionally putting the Cid in harm's way. Once again the Cid emerged victorious and delivered the city to King Alfonso. Moor and Christian alike shouted his name from the city walls and named him El Cid Campeador, my lord, the conqueror. After nearly 400 years of Moorish rule, the city of Toledo was ruled by a Christian king. But still, Alfonso was not satisfied. He accused the Cid of seeking personal glory at the expense of the crown. When he heard the peasants shouting the name of the Cid instead of Alfonso's own name, he became even more angered. I knew then that our contented lives in Castile were about to end. King Alfonso sent his most loyal and able servant Rodrigo Diaz the Cid into exile with only his horse Bavieca. Myself and our 2 daughters were left at the monastery in Castile. When Rodrigo and I parted, It felt like a nail being torn from its finger. Rodrigo rode alone into the Castilian winter. He was not alone for long. Everywhere the Cid went, mercenaries and soldiers were eager to follow. Soon he had a small army of his own. But the Cid was not content to wander the wilds of Castile forever. He needed a castle and a lord to serve. This too he found in the most unlikely of places. Tamid, Lord of Zaragoza, was a gifted leader of men, but like many of the Moors, he was also a poet and artist. The cultural achievements of the Moors made the rest of Europe seem barbaric by comparison. As the Cid parleyed with Lord Motamed in his sumptuous palace, he feasted on meals that came floating down an indoor stream. Motamed bestowed rich gifts on the Cid and made him a wealthy man. But the Cid, ever the loyal servant of Castile, convinced Motamed to ratify a treaty making Saragossa part of Castile. The Cid never fought openly against King Alfonso, though he did make enemies with Count Berengar and other Spanish lords who wanted only tributes of gold from the Moors and were not interested in making alliances with them. Count Berengar would remain the Cid's enemy for many years. King Alfonso watched with alarm as the combined Christian-Moorish forces of the Cid gained power and prestige. Finally, he could stand it no longer and sent his own army against Motamed's Moors at Saragossa. As much as he would have liked to come to the assistance of his friend Motamed, the Cid could not draw steel against King Alfonso, as he was still the Cid's rightful lord. Since the Cid could not assist him, Motamed was forced to seek help elsewhere. When he contacted the Berbers who lived beyond the sea in Gibraltar, however, he received more than he bargained for. These veiled religious zealots waged a continuous jihad across the barren dunes of the Sahara. Their leader, the fanatical Yusuf, who never showed his face, immediately prepared to cross the ocean into Spain with thousands of men and camels. King Alfonso's army was certain to crumble beneath this new wave of invaders. Alfonso needed only have mentioned that Spain was in jeopardy, and the Cid would have come. And when the Cid did finally come to his king's aid, the Berbers were crushed, and their leader Yusuf was forced to flee back to Africa. The Cid bowed to Alfonso, ready to return to his rightful place as the king's champion. But King Alfonso was angered that the Cid had not arrived sooner, and ordered him to return to his exile. This time, he seized the Cid's wife and children. Many long years did I rot in the dungeons of Castile. The Cid was in exile again, and this time there were no Moors to welcome him in. He wandered the bleak rocks of Castile and wondered if his tale was finally at an end. And yet, a remarkable thing happened. Many mercenaries and knights knew of the tales of the Cid and were eager to follow him, even without a castle. As the Cid wandered further south, more men, Christian and Muslim, joined his army. Eventually, the Cid had a large enough force to carve out a fiefdom of his own. King Alfonso had set his sights on beautiful Valencia, the jewel of the Moorish coast, but the Cid was closer and could get there sooner. If he conquered Valencia, the Cid would have protection not only from the machinations of Alfonso, but also a bulwark against the inevitable second invasion of Yusuf and the Berbers. Events would have unfolded simply then, had not our old enemy, Count Berengar of Barcelona, picked that moment to strike back at the Cid. Abundant the orange groves and olive trees seemed to the conquerors who had come from bleak Castile. Valencia was a tropical paradise, complete with palm trees, silk market, and abundant fish and waterfowl. After the Cid had secured the castle and saw to the defenses of the city, he sent for me and the children. Our reunion took place on the highest tower of the castle, before a sea that consumed the entire horizon. We turned Valencia into our own kingdom, uniting 8,000 Christian and 20,000 Moorish soldiers. It was the greatest of the Cid's accomplishments to date. We were far away from the reach of King Alfonso, and Count Berengar himself was safely locked in Valencia's dungeons. In time he would be ransomed, and one of our daughters married to his nephew and heir to ward against future conflicts. If only the tale of the Cid had ended there beneath the Valencian sunsets, but it was not to be. Valencia lay right in the path of the advancing horde of frenzied Yusuf and his Berber hordes. We were trapped and alone in our kingdom of Valencia. The Cid immediately sent out messages for potential allies, but there were few to be found. The Christian kingdom of Aragon was too far away, and King Alfonso of Castile seemed in no hurry to come to the Cid's defense. Even the Cid's old ally, Motamed the Moor, was of no avail. Yusuf had sent him into exile in the Sahara Desert, where he spent the rest of his sad days composing poetry. The Berbers rode around the city for 10 days and nights, shrieking and banging their weapons on shields made of hippopotamus hide. But the Cid comforted his troops, prayed and planned a counterattack. And then the unthinkable happened. During a brilliant surprise attack to capture gold and horses from the Berbers, Rodrigo Diaz, my Cid, was shot by a stray arrow. The surprise attack became a rout, and the Cid's men barely made it back to the castle with his broken body. Rodrigo and I knew he would not last the night, but we also knew that without their Cid to lead them, the soldiers of Valencia would never have the strength to stand against the Berbers. So it was that even as he breathed his last breath, I strapped my husband onto his horse Bavieca and placed his sword Tizon in his hand. Bavieca stood out above the city of Valencia. My one hope was that the men would not realize the charade, realize that their Cid was already dead. It was the twilight of Moorish Spain. The Berber army had been broken, and Valencia withstood the siege. King Alfonso would not allow us to bury the Cid until he could personally attend the funeral. When he arrived, he dispelled all thoughts of interring the Cid into the earth. Instead, the Cid's body was preserved and placed near the altar of the church, seated on an ivory stool that he had captured from the Moors, clothed in precious silk and holding his sword Tizon in his left hand. And who was left to rule in Valencia? King Alfonso of Castile? Or Count Berengar of Barcelona? No. Valencia is mine. It is I, Jimena Diaz, who claims rulership of my dead husband's kingdom. And if the Berbers return to Valencia, it is I whom they shall find commanding the soldiers of Rodrigo Diaz, el Cid Campeador.
So, you have come to hear the tale of Frederick Barbarossa. Better order us another round. Maybe 3. You see, it is a great tale. But then again, everything about the man was great. Barbarossa was a man of great appetites, great ambitions, and a great red beard. But the question you want to know is, was that enough? Is the will of one man enough to forge an empire? For there was no Holy Roman Empire at that time, only a gaggle of quarreling city-states. These dubiously loyal princedoms were more interested in a loose confederation than a unified empire. But Barbarossa, he believed that he was the emperor by will of God, and he intended to bring the Holy Roman Empire back to its former glory. If that meant crushing all of the German princes, well, so be it. They have called Barbarossa the scourge of Europe, but he was as skilled a diplomat as he was a warrior. He united Germany with more than just a sword. He established a set of legal codes known as the land pieces. He helped the hungry by fixing an official price for grain after every harvest. The provinces of Germany quickly became the wealthiest and most powerful in Europe. The Holy Roman Empire was so successful, in fact, that it quickly overgrew its boundaries. The empire was in full bloom, and her population was rapidly expanding. The Germans felled forests, drained marshlands, and reclaimed land from the sea itself. But there was still not enough space. Bringing the vastness of Poland into the empire would ease the pressure on the empire's borders. To deal with Poland, Barbarossa called up one of his mightiest vassals, Henry the Lion. Henry was a powerful prince of Saxony, and his decadent palaces outshone the emperor's own. While he swore fealty to Barbarossa, some questioned whether Henry the Lion did not want the empire for his own. By ordering Henry the Lion to aid in the subjugation of Poland, Barbarossa meant to test his oath of allegiance once and for all. Henry expected to be drawn and quartered, the usual fate of traitors in those times. But Barbarossa recognized the potential for a strong ally and officially forgave him, provided that Henry the Lion would swear to support Barbarossa from now on. Amazingly, Henry agreed. Germany was unified, and Henry the Lion was pacified. But the Holy Roman Empire was not complete. Harkening back to Charlemagne, the empire claimed ownership of Italy, and especially Rome. In Rome, the Pope firmly believed that it was the Church, not the Emperor, who was the ultimate authority for the empire. Barbarossa could not convince the Pope to see things his way, so he appointed his own Pope. This too was not enough, for Pope and anti-Pope promptly excommunicated each other. In the end, Barbarossa had to resort again to politics at the point of a lance. If the Pope would not listen to reason, then perhaps he would concede with 2,000 German knights pouring down the Italian peninsula. The greatest of the northern cities, the virtual capital of Lombardy, was Milan. The lords of Milan were as proud as they were belligerent. Barbarossa was determined to raze Milan to the ground as a warning to all the Italian city-states, and particularly the Pope in Rome. The message was clear. He, Frederick Barbarossa, was the one and true Holy Roman Emperor. Barbarossa was not kind to the Milanese. In response to one attempt at negotiations during the siege, he sent 6 Italians marching back to the city. 5 had been blinded, but the 6th only had his nose cut off so that he could lead the other 5. Northern Italy had been mercilessly conquered and placed under imperial governance, but Italy would not submit. If anything, the destruction of Milan made the Italian cities even more incensed at their would-be emperor. As long as Barbarossa's knights were present, peace endured. But the emperor could not be everywhere at once. Whenever he went to Italy, Germany would flare up, and when Barbarossa returned to Germany, the Italians began plotting again. Milan had fallen, but the remainder of the Italian cities joined together in a confederation known as the Lombard League for the purpose of defeating Barbarossa. If Barbarossa intended to make Italy part of the Holy Roman Empire, he would have to conquer the Lombard League city by city. But Barbarossa still had a secret weapon: Henry the Lion and his seasoned troops. Henry the Lion was immediately banished to England. Separated from his wealth and army, there was little more he could do to plague Barbarossa. After 6 campaigns down to Italy, Barbarossa was weary of crossing the Alps. The fighting ended with the signing of the Treaty of Constance, which said effectively that the Emperor and the Pope were equals. It was a tenuous peace, and one that seemed unlikely to endure, when suddenly the Pope died. The new Pope was less interested in squabbling with the Emperor than he was in events down south. You see, the Europeans were being driven out of the Holy Land. It was time for another crusade. The Holy Roman Empire was complete, and for the moment, both Germany and Italy swore fealty to Barbarossa. Alas, the peace was not to endure. The Crusader states in Palestine were crumbling. A Saracen king named Saladin had evicted virtually every crusader from their castle. The Pope called for a new crusade before the Holy Land became Saracen once again. Remarkably, Barbarossa agreed to undertake this new crusade for the Pope he had fought so hard against. King Philip of France and England's Richard the Lionhearted had already boarded ships bound for the Middle East. But Barbarossa's army was the largest by far, and there wasn't a fleet in Europe that could transport it. The emperor would have to march overland to Constantinople and through the land of the Turks to reach the rendezvous in Jerusalem. Constantinople was the capital of the Byzantine Empire and one of the most glorious cities on the globe. Barbarossa's army would be able to rest and resupply in Byzantium before it began the Great March. Barbarossa's weary army had marched for hundreds of miles through the cracked mountains in the heat of July. So when it stumbled upon the Goksu River, the men were astonished and grateful. Barbarossa himself could not resist plunging into the cold water without even pausing to remove his armor. To the disbelief of the surviving troops, Barbarossa drowned. Some said the emperor could not swim in his plate armor. Others believed that his 67-year-old heart had finally given out. Regardless of the exact cause of death, Barbarossa's crusade ended there on June 10th, 1190. The Holy Roman Emperor was gone. Barbarossa's soldiers were devastated. Several knights committed suicide. Others converted and joined the Saracens, so convinced were they that God himself had deserted them. However, a handful of knights were not yet willing to board a ship bound for Europe. The body of mighty Barbarossa was fished out of the river, pickled in vinegar and sealed in a barrel. The army of the Holy Roman Empire would not be joining in the crusade. Yet there was still a chance for a small victory. The surviving knights vowed to take Barbarossa's body on to Jerusalem. Even in death, the emperor would keep his promise. There's a legend concerning every great king, from Arthur on through Barbarossa, that says the king will return someday when his country needs him. Myths and legends about the sleeping emperor were passed down in German folk tales. The Holy Roman Empire did not endure. She fell back into a patchwork of tiny nations. Some would say Barbarossa's rule was a failure. But is it not a greater testament to the man that it was the force of his will alone that held the empire together? And what of Henry the Lion? With Barbarossa gone, there was nothing stopping him from returning to the Holy Roman Empire. But I am an old man now. What harm could I possibly do?
Egypt. A month since I entered the Holy Land. I was in a foreign land, and I was dying. I wandered the cold desert for 4 nights before the horse archers found me. I had abandoned my mount to the vultures, and my armor to the heat of the day. As a knight, I was not much of a threat to them. I thought these men were Turks, come to toy with their prey. But when I could distinguish the riders from the blur of mirage, I saw that they were Saracens, the rulers of the Middle East. I had ridden to the Holy Land with the Crusaders from France and Normandy, so I was by all rights these Saracens' enemy. Yet they gave me water and a spindly horse, and led me back to their leader. And that was how I met Saladin. The paintings in Europe show Saladin as demonic, barbarian. Yet he is more chivalrous than any knight I'd met before, and prefers the palaces of Damascus to slaughtering Normans in the deserts. I had not expected hospitality from Saracens. We Normans execute any armed Arab we capture. but Saladin left me free to explore his camp. Perhaps he wants an objective observer to chronicle the prodigious bloodshed ahead. Saladin's army is heading south to Egypt to reinforce Cairo. Egypt is a tempting prize for the Crusaders. She is fabulously wealthy, yet governed by an ineffectual fool. Before my capture, I was en route to join in the Crusaders' assault on Egypt. It is a bitter irony that now I shall view the contest from the enemy camp. So it was that I found myself less than 100 miles from the Dead Sea in the company of my enemies. Franks are dispersed and the Egyptian army broken. Saladin has taken his place as governor of the Nile. Any European king would seize this opportunity to eliminate his political enemies. Saladin, however, allowed any Egyptian opposed to his rule to leave the city unharmed. Saladin has set out to win over the population. In Cairo, he built mosques and palaces, universities and hospitals. My own countrymen, the sons of Europe, showed naught but treachery, while the Saracens worked to dignify their civilization. It is a troubling turn of events, and I have difficulty sleeping. The holy city of Medina, year 15 of my capture. Volumes have I filled with my fatigued writings. Lord Saladin reads them only rarely. He speaks of greater events yet to come. The political boundaries in this endless desert have shifted as a result of 3 crusades. 4 Crusader states now exist in the Holy Land. After the Saracens' victory in Egypt, the Crusader leaders realized that Saladin was worthy of their concern. They were quick to suggest a treaty. I hoped that with peace at last upon us, I would be returned to my own folk. But this peace, so short-lived, is already broken. And it is not Saracen, but Crusader, that has violated his word of honor. Renaud de Chatillon, a wicked French knight, has been raiding Arab territory in defiance of the treaty. He attacks trade caravans, and his pirate ships threaten the Saracen holy cities of Medina and Mecca. Saladin, in his fury, has sworn to kill Renaud with his own hands. Although I am still prisoner, Saladin and his generals dine with me. Over meals we discuss mathematics and astronomy. I never imagined a race of desert folk could be so wise. Baghdad, the Saracen capital, is the most civilized city in the world, with free hospitals, public baths, a postal service, and banks with branches as far away as China. But as we eat, talk inevitably turns to war. Renaud's pirate vessels now rot at the bottom of the Red Sea. His raids have stopped. Renaud has escaped, but I suspect Saladin shall neither forgive nor forget. Galilee, year 20 of my capture. Last night we rode into a sandstorm. The men dared not open their mouths to speak. We clung to the necks of horses or camels while waves of sand rose and fell around us. The Saracens have pursued a large force of Europeans into the desert. The Crusaders carry with them a relic, a piece of the true cross. Capturing this artifact will deal a severe blow to the morale of Saladin's Christian foes. I asked Saladin why we were here, miles from civilization and water. He said, to bring crimson death to the blue-eyed enemy. The huge Crusader army has halted to make it stand beneath the 2 peaks called the Horns of Hattin. At the Horns is only a single pool of water, and Saladin controls it. At night, the Saracens ride out and extravagantly pour out vessels of water into the sand, within sight of the thirst-crazed Europeans. It is cruelty worthy of a Crusader. Fighting was fierce. The Crusaders had to conquer or die. Mostly, they died. Saladin has treated his prisoners well, providing them with ice water from the mountains and comfortable tents. For the first time in years, I have been able to speak to fellow countrymen, but I am unsure what to say to these invaders. Not all of the prisoners were treated so royally. Renaud de Chatillon was captured here, and fulfilling his vow, Saladin sliced off Renaud's head with his own scimitar. How ironic that it was only after the Crusaders entered their land that the Saracens were transformed into the people that we set out to destroy. Jerusalem. 20 years have I been with the Saracens. Saladin's target is Jerusalem. The great ancient city is sacred to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and is the virtual capital of the Holy Land. If there can be a victor in this endless conflict, it will be the army who holds Jerusalem. To complicate matters, Saladin is determined not to harm the city itself. If a single holy shrine is damaged, the populace might well view Saladin not as a liberator, but as yet another conqueror. The last time I entered Jerusalem as a crusading knight, I waded through the blood of victims. This time, not a building was looted, not a townsperson was injured. Saladin set free nearly every prisoner he took. The citizens of Jerusalem proclaimed Saladin as their savior. He offered to free me, but after 20 years in his service, I have decided to see it out to the end. Tiberius, 20.5 years of bloodshed. We are far from the ocean, so the Saracens interpret the smell of salt and commotion of sea birds as signs from heaven. I sit near Saladin's tent, watching the butchery below. Saracen horse archers sweep through yet another unorganized mob of European soldiers. The great Crusader nations have been reduced to puny city-states. Only Tiberias, Tyre, and Ascalon are still in Crusader hands. Nonetheless, these three cities are well fortified and could withstand any siege. Saladin has had many victories on the open desert, but the Crusader castles are unparalleled. If he is victorious now, the Holy Land will belong to the Saracens again. A failure could mean decades more of carnage. Once I was amazed at the nobility of the Saracen warriors. Only a few years ago they entered battle as gentlemen, bringing with them treasure chests, wine, singing girls, and collections of doves, nightingales, and parrots. No longer. In reaction to European hostility and fanaticism, the Saracens have steadily become more resolute, more bloodthirsty. Their love of art is replaced by a love for battle. Now, in answer to the crusade, they have adapted their principle of jihad for warfare. The result has been devastating to the Crusaders. The European presence in the Holy Land was finished, or so everyone believed. The city of Acre. Nearly 21 years have I ridden with Saladin. When word of the Saracen victory at Jerusalem reached Europe, another crusade was launched. The kings of the three most powerful nations in Europe, England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire, embarked for the Holy Land with hundreds of thousands of troops. Saladin knows that his most dangerous opponent is Richard the Lion-Hearted of England, a brilliant tactician who learned the art of war fighting against his own father. He builds colossal fortresses and fights always from the front lines, the ideal of a romantic warrior. Richard's army has come ashore near Acre. Much of Saladin's army is trapped in the city, while two monstrous English trebuchets pound at Acre's walls. If Richard can defeat our army here, then he can walk into Jerusalem unopposed. Saladin knows that this is the climax of his jihad. All the Crusader states have fallen. If the Saracens can hold onto Acre, then the Europeans will be forced to return home. If Acre falls, then the centuries-long nightmare of eternal war, raid and counter-raid begin again. All Saladin's victories will be for nothing. First year of my freedom. The fighting is over. The fire has gone out of Richard's lust for conquest. The two respected adversaries started speaking, finally, of peace. War is not gentle with men's health. Richard fell ill with a fever. Because he respected his enemy, Saladin sent Richard fruit and mountain snow to comfort him. Soon enough, Richard boarded a ship headed back to England. the Third Crusade is over. The final treaty was signed on September 2nd, 1192. By its terms, Jerusalem remains in Saracen hands, but Christian pilgrims are to be allowed to visit all the holy places freely and safely. It seems a fitting compromise to a war that has been fought over religion and land. The war is over, but I do not think I shall ever see Normandy again. I want to see the steel foundries in Damascus, and the gardens of the Caliph in Baghdad. I have never seen the mighty Crec de Chalier, now fallen fortress of the Knights Templar. The Holy Land has many wondrous sights, and I can spend a lifetime here. It is peace in the Holy Land, for the moment. Sadly, in a land so small, home to so many different cultures, birthplace of 3 of the world's great religions, I suspect that blood may one day stain the sand again.
A blue wolf took as his spouse a fallow doe. They settled at the head of the Onon River to raise their offspring, and there were born the Mongols. So begins my life's work, the secret history of the Mongols. I have been selected to compose this epic because great events are about to take place. We are going to leave Mongolia. I have lived always on this frigid, dry, and endless steppe. The tribes here squabble like vultures fighting over the desiccated corpse of a marmot. We fight over limited resources, scarce water, few trees, sparse grass for our herds to graze on. A wise and dangerous man named Temujin means to change all this. He says that if the tribal conflict is to end, the Mongols require but 2 things. First, we need green pastures for our herds. With more to go around, there will be less competition among the tribes. Second, we are a nation of warriors. We need a common enemy with which to do battle. To meet both these needs, Temujin has come up with the most modest of schemes: to unite the tribes and go to war with anyone who stands in our path. How, we ask him, how can nomadic horsemen in felt tents embark on a campaign of world conquest? Temujin replies that we will fight not as warriors, but as a unified army. We fight not for our glory, but for the glory of Mongolia. And with those words, the name of Temujin has passed almost into obscurity. His name is replaced with a title: Great Khan, Genghis Khan. Nearly all of the Mongol tribes have united under the Great Khan. The chieftains of those tribes reluctant to join were boiled alive. Each day, new faces have taken up the bow. Unfamiliar hands hold the 9 bands of yak hair that has become Genghis's standard. There are more men and horses gathered in the camp than I ever knew existed. Horse archers and lancers, men in leather cuirass and silk armor, all lift their heads upward to the platform from where Genghis speaks. The Great Khan calls himself the punishment of God. Men smile like hungry wolves. It is dawn of the first day of the Mongolian Empire. Winter has come to the steppes. The earth is frozen hard as bone, and the only movement is steam rising from the nostrils of men and horses. Only the promise of battle brings warmth. Nearly all the tribes in Mongolia now answer to Genghis Khan. But with success comes enemies. A man named Kushlak has challenged Genghis's right to rule. Kushlak sows discord among the Karakitai tribe and means to have himself proclaimed as a rival Khan. Genghis cannot allow these transgressions to go unpunished. He needs to set an example. So we ride west to find and slay Kushlak. If the Karakitai shelter him, then their lives are forfeit as well. Khan knows that there are weapons aside from the lance and bow. He is a master of mental warfare. Just as he has made an example of Kushlak, he makes examples of enemy lands. When first we encounter a new adversary, the Great Khan spares no one. We ride to the closest town, slay every living thing, burn down the city, sow the fields with salt, and make a mountain of enemy skulls. After that, the other towns are quick to send forth their emissaries, eager to placate the ravenous Mongol hordes. Now all of Mongolia is in the grasp of Genghis Khan. Beyond are two vast empires, China to the east and Persia to the west. Persia is the sensible next choice of battle, since it separates us from the rich forage pastures in Europe. But first, Genghis Khan has another score to settle. After witnessing the power of our cavalry in action, the Chinese spoke of nothing but peace. They even promised support for our campaign westward. But now that we have turned away from China, they have decided not to deliver the men-in-arms they promised Genghis. It is time for another demonstration. Persia can wait as the horde wheels east once more, and we prepare to march into China, the largest, most advanced empire in the world. Was a glorious slaughter. For years, visitors to China will be astounded by the mountain of human and horse skeletons that we have erected. The hordes have gained one huge advantage by this invasion of China: technology. We now possess the knowledge and equipment to allow us to make siege weapons. We will crack open the Persian and European castles to reach the softer parts within. Genghis is pleased with our progress and with the legacy he leaves behind. His mother once ate wild onions and rodents to keep from starving. But the children and grandchildren of Genghis will eat off plates of Persian gold. Sleep in the saddle, drink the rain. Eat nothing but dried meat, dried milk, and horse blood. Such is the life of a Mongol at war. At night, we are rewarded with fermented yak's milk and the promise of Persian treasures. Driven on by the words of the great Khan, we have crossed miles of the Asian continent at full gallop. Before us lies the vast empire of Persia. The Khwarazm Shah will be given one chance to submit, and then his cities will be pulled down brick by brick. But not all of us head into Persia. Genghis has sent Subutai Ba'atur of the reindeer people north into Russia. The Russian principalities are disorganized, and Genghis hopes that Subutai can break them one by one. Then the borders of Mongolia will cover all of Asia. Persian army numbered nearly 500,000 men, but was beaten by a Mongol army less than half that size. The governors of outlying cities were executed by pouring molten silver into their eyes and throats. The capital city of Samarkand, which was expected to withstand our siege for a year, fell in 5 days. Separate mountains were made of the skulls of men, women, children, horses, dogs, and cats. We roamed the streets in wonder at the opulence of the Persians, drinking at their fountains and gorging ourselves on sherbet and tropical fruit. For a man born in a tent, it seemed as if Genghis Khan had torn open the gates to heaven itself. Russia and Mesopotamia were now ours to command. The empire now stretched over 7,000 miles from the Pacific Ocean to the Black Sea. We were about to enter Europe when tragedy struck. Old wolves do not die gracefully. Warriors their entire lives, they do not know how to live when they grow old and their fangs fall out. Such it is with Mongols as well. Genghis Khan was now 80 years old. On the night when we knew that our glorious conquest was about to end, Genghis summoned his sons to his tent. They found their father shivering before a fire, delirious with pain. "My descendants will wear gold," he said. "They will eat the finest meats and ride the finest horses, and forget to whom they owe it all. A deed is not glorious until it is finished." And he refused to die until Ogatai, his third son, promised to continue the war. Ogatai emerged from the tent, carrying his father's bow, and declared, "This storm is not yet finished. I still hear the sound of lightning, and it strikes in Poland. Church bells rang in Europe when they saw our horde pouring out of the mountains. The armies of Bohemia and Germany hastened to Poland's defense. To them, our army might have been from the underworld itself, still commanded by the shade of the Great Khan. European knights fight as individuals, but Mongols fight as part of a united army. Laden down with armor, the Polish and Germans could not catch our quick-footed horses. Time and again we fired flaming arrows at them, then retreated out of range. When the enemy cavalry pursued, we would lead them into an ambush. The ambush was always announced by the Nakara, a huge drum carried into battle on a camel. 100 times has the Nakara sounded on this day. We were ordered to cut off an ear for every victim. 9 sacks of ears were sent back to Ogatai Khan. Only one enemy stands in our way. France and the nations beyond are beaten from decades of crusades. If we break Eastern Europe, then it is likely that all of Western Europe will surrender. But to break the East, we must defeat Hungary. Hungary possesses the most formidable cavalry in all of Europe. They have not only the strength of European armor, but their horses are cousins to our own, having drifted in from across the Russian steppes. The Sazo River that separates us from the army of Hungary is frozen, so we will be unable to deploy boats. Instead, the battle will be won or lost over who controls the bridge. Subotai is coming with reinforcements. If we can survive the charge of Hungarian knights until Subotai arrives, then we can hope to take the bridge. Much rests on this simple bridge. If we capture the Sajo crossing, we capture Hungary. If Hungary falls, so falls Europe. With Europe and Asia under Mongolian command, our conquest of the world will be complete and final. Nothing stands between us and the Atlantic Ocean. The Mongol Empire comprises 2 whole continents. Europe and Asia belong to the hordes. Every place we entered has changed forever with our passing. Russia, once filled with quarreling city-states, much like ancient Mongolia, will forever be melded into a single gigantic nation. Genghis Khan forged the largest empire ever created in the life of one man. His body was carried back to the river Onan, where the legendary Blue Wolf and Fallow Doe once lived. He was buried in the ground, and 1,000 horsemen rode over the site to disguise it. Genghis Khan's final resting place was devoured by the steppes. My people cherish the legend that their great ruler will one day return to lead his horsemen to another bloody victory.
We are without a leader. The dead king of Scotland has no heir. War creeps in from the south, where Edward Longshanks, the avaricious king of England, has returned from successful campaigns to conquer Wales and France. As Longshanks turns his attention to Scotland, the shadow of fear settles across the Highlands. The English have thousands of Welsh longbowmen, hundreds of knights on horseback, and dozens of siege weapons. We Scottish have a rabble of untrained soldiers who do not even know how to march in a straight line. We must act soon if we have any chance of resistance. We need to forge an army by any means necessary. Scotland has soldiers now, if only a few. But if we are to turn back the greed of Edward Longshanks, we will need many more recruits. Much more gold in our coffers. These ancient stones and oaks around us will soon be steeped in the blood of clansmen. An army marches on its stomach, or so the old saying goes. My clansmen have been farming and tending sheep for hundreds of years, but gathering enough food to feed an army is a different matter entirely. Without a strong economy, the meager forces that we've cobbled together will collapse again. Edward Longshanks, for all his disrepute, has shown military tactics in Wales, England, and France to be very effective, if not cruel and ruthless. He's indeed an enemy to be feared. The English sacked the town of Berwick upon Tweed. Would that I could call it a battle, but it was truly more of a massacre. Unless we organize our army, there will be more massacres to follow. I pray we can be ready for Longshanks' coming. In villages throughout the Highlands, there is grim talk of skirmishes between Scotland and England. We lost the city of Dunbar this week. Scottish defenders broke ranks and fled. The English have an army that is larger and better trained. To compete with them, we are going to need new recruits to pick up the spear, sword, or bow. We must remake these shepherds into soldiers. Now that we have militias stationed across the border, the English have slowed their raids. But facing Longshanks' army will be another matter. The wicked English king has yet to bring his famous longbows to bear. Our militias could only get us so far. We are going to need more advanced weapons. Rumors creep in from the south of a giant who leads the forces of Scotland, his great sword driving through earth and man and horse alike. If this mythical knight can hold the English advance, it will give us time to develop the arms we need. Even now, our smiths are forging swords and fletchers are making arrows and crossbow bolts. Longshanks has invaded, stormed, and sacked the city of Perth. It's worse. He's captured the fabled Stone of Scone and declared himself King of Scotland. If we cannot bring about a victory in battle soon, then the Scottish armies will be too demoralized to put up any fight at all. If this mythical Scottish giant does exist, I wish he'd get his forces up to Stirling, where we shall next do battle. The time for minor skirmishes is over. We now prepare for war. The villain Longshanks is poised to cross the River Forth and threaten the town of Stirling with a force of men-at-arms, heavy cavalry, and a multitude of archers. Our newly formed army marches southward to establish our own base and attack the English before they can ready their troops. Stirling was our first great victory. Even as we held the coastline, word came in that the Stirling Bridge had been held by a force of Scots led by the mythical knight, of whom so many have spoken. Now, we know his name. Sir William Wallace, the Hammer of the English. Edward Longshanks names Wallace a traitor and a criminal, but Sir William replies that he cannot be a traitor, since he never swore fealty to an English king. With Wallace leading our armies, the men fight with renewed vigor. Perhaps the tide of our misfortunes is about to turn. Our coffers were depleted at the Battle of Stirling, so we need to strengthen our economy once again before pushing south into lands held by the English. We need to construct a market and establish trade routes to the villages of friendly clans. Local legends speak of 3 sacred relics hidden south of Stirling. Acquiring these artifacts for Wallace's army will be a great boost to Scottish morale. With the 3 relics now locked away safely in Scottish churches, men murmur that we are blessed by the heavens. Our army now stands a chance as we prepare for the final clash with the English. Scotland now has archers and knights of our own with which to meet Longshanks. We march south to Falkirk, where we will rendezvous with the army of William Wallace and plan our combined attack upon the English castle. only way we can hold the boggy lowlands around Falkirk is to build a castle and as many walls as we can construct in a short time. These fortifications will serve to protect our camp as we construct siege weapons with which to assault the English castle. Once the castle is constructed, Wallace himself has sworn to join our forces, and together we will attack Longshanks and his English troops. It looked certain that we would be defeated at Falkirk. Yet, somehow, though outnumbered and outranged by English longbows, we were victorious! English castle was torn down, and a Scottish one will be built in its place. William Wallace has shown us the path to victory. Although he's but one man, he inspires great deeds in others, and many of the Scottish princes and lords have drawn their swords with his. Wallace's own sword is a 5.5-foot beast, forged, of course, in Scotland. He has sworn not to rest until his sword finds the neck of Edward Longshanks. The struggle will continue, but we have learned the ways of war. Now, it is the English who will know fear.
The rains come again, until there is nothing left of road or wood or field. Nothing in the entire world but mud. The exhausted English soldiers hoist their longbows over their heads, trying to protect the precious yew wood from the water. The empty wagons can scarcely roll forward, even though all of the supplies have long been eaten. From the rear, terrifying hoofbeats resound. The French knights have come. The English have been in a slow retreat ever since the debacle at Harfleur, where King Henry V's glorious siege dragged on and on, costing the lives of 3,000 Englishmen. Now, Henry has all but abandoned his dream of establishing his hereditary claim to the French crown. Like his men, he only wants to reach Calais and the ships that will return them home to England. But on the road back to Calais, the French army overtakes Henry. Knowing that the English are fatigued, starving, and outnumbered 3-1, the French have no interest in negotiation. The English make their stand on a wooded hilltop. The archers plant stakes in the ground to offer some barrier against the deadly French cavalry. Henry's only hope is that his lightly armored infantry prove more nimble than the impetuous French knights, and that the range of his archers can even the odds before the French horses are upon them. The Battle of Agincourt is remembered not because it was an inevitable triumph, but because it was an upset. Outnumbered English longbows were victorious over French knights only because the knights had to charge up a muddy hill through a dense forest. The English wore little armor and were able to catch the encumbered French in the middle of their retreat. A charge by Henry and his surviving cavalry pushed aside the beaten French and opened the road to the coast. Despite his victory, Henry did not follow through on his attack, but withdrew to England. The true winner of the battle was Burgundy, which was able to come to power in a vacuum emptied by both the English and the French.
February 19, Army Camp near Vaucouleurs. This morning I awoke to visions of fire and steel. These nightmares come more often now that I have seen my beloved France eaten away in years of war. I wandered through camp, ignoring the new snowfall, but observing the wounds and weariness of every soldier under my command, observing the desperation in their eyes. It was then that I first saw the girl. She told us that her name was Jeanne. She told us she was but a peasant who did not know how to ride or fight. She told us that she intended to rescue France. The darkness lifted from the men's souls. Her voice rang with conviction, and we drank in her every word. I may have lost my faith, But Jean has not lost hers, and that is enough for me. Jean has asked our ragged band of soldiers to take her to Chinon, where the rightful ruler of France, the Dauphin, hides from his foes. The war-torn land between is infested with enemy marauders, and we will lose many men. Death is by now an old companion, but for Jean, we will face it again. As Jean's footsteps echo down the marbled hall of the chateau, the fat and whispering dukes did not but stare. The Dauphin himself seemed afraid as she kissed his feet. "My gentle Dauphin," she demanded, "why does England claim what is ours? Why are you not crowned King of France, as is your right?" The courtiers began to murmur. The chamberlain whispered lies into the Dauphin's ear, but the Dauphin pushed the chamberlain away and rose to meet Jean's gaze. She stands only to the shoulder of the shortest man, but all of us must look up to speak to her. I know not what silent conversation passed between the Dauphin and his would-be savior, but it was obvious that His Majesty was in the same thrall as we. March 26th, Chinon. It is one thing for a band of dispirited soldiers to put their trust in a teenage girl. It is entirely another for that girl to be given command of the army of an entire nation. We were filled with pride when we heard the Dauphin's heralds pronounce Jean the Maid as commander of the army of France. So that she may look like a general, the Dauphin presented Jean with a great war horse and a suit of white armor. Jean instructed me to look for an ancient sword buried beneath the altar of a local church. I was skeptical, but not only did the men unearth a rusted blade, but we found that the sword belonged to Charlemagne, grandfather of France. I shall not doubt her word again. Still visible on the hilt was the fleur-de-lis. Jean adopted the fleur-de-lis as her symbol and had it blazoned upon her battle standard. Wherever Jean goes, the standard goes also. It goes with us to Orléans. The city of Orléans is one of the finest in France, but it is under siege by our enemies, England and Burgundy, and is about to fall. This war has dragged on for 100 years with precious few French victories. The people of Orléans need a savior. They are to get Jeanne of Arc. Prophecy that she would be wounded at Orléans. At the height of the battle, an arbalest bolt knocked her from her horse. We could not believe our misfortune. But as we carried Jean away from the carnage, the battle was won. Orléans was free. When we entered the city, the entire population cheered us on from windows, rooftops, and city streets. They fired artillery into the night sky and shouted aloud their nickname for Jeanne, La Pucelle, the Maid of Orléans. June 14th, Orléans. Our rescue of Orléans was a setback for our enemies, but only a minor one. The British still possess half of France. Tragically, we have cooled our heels for weeks while the Dauphin's advisors debate. Jean became irritated with the delay and reassembled her army. She talks of nothing but her mission to drive the British into the sea. The force of Jean's will is titanic. She has gathered to her banner swearing brigands and knaves and turns them into patriots and heroes. Among them is the man La Hire. A giant clad in plate mail, he drives men on with curses and fists. There will be plenty of British necks for La Hire to break at Patay. Patay is the gateway to the Loire River Valley.
The British hold the Loire in a grip of steel, whilst a huge army under Sir John Fastolf devastates the countryside. John leads us to Patay to capture the British castles. However, we must avoid Fastolf's army till we are strong enough to face his veterans. After Patay, the myth of British invulnerability was dispelled. Now, our army knows it is possible to win, but only if we are resolute and cunning. The British are a most deadly enemy, and their longbowmen time and again have decimated a charge of French knights. To make matters worse, we now face enemies on both sides. The Dauphin's advisors spend more and more time wrangling, jealous of Jean's influence at court. I pray that Jean can complete her divine mission before the Dauphin's envious advisors betray her. June 25th, Orléans. Dead France is returning to life. Our army swells with new recruits. In olden times, men swore fealty only to their particular lord. Now we fight not for insolent lords and ladies, but for France. For all of us, Jean is France. There is no distinction in our minds. The Dauphin himself has arrived in Orléans. Never have I seen such a celebration. France needs a king, so we must escort the Dauphin to Reims, where he can be properly crowned. Yet, the city of Reims is dangerously menaced by the Anglo-Burgundian army. The cities of Troyes and Chalon also bar the way. Jean commands that we must liberate all three cities before the coronation, and we eagerly seek to fight. As we rode into Reims, a sea of peasants and lords knelt before Jean. Some even knelt to kiss our horses' hoofprints. Cannon thundered, and 1,000 flags danced in the breeze. In the enormous palace, the Dauphin knelt before the Archbishop and rose as King of France. Prayers, anthems, and sermons filled the great chateau. Interspersed among perfumed dukes and ladies were tattered soldiers from our army, many still bearing wounds. Jeanne herself was at the king's side, as was her bedraggled battle standard. Despite the celebration, I know in my heart that this war is far from over. Our fathers and grandfathers died fighting against the English. Jeanne gives us hope, but I do not know if hope is enough to ensure victory. September 3rd, Reims. France has a king once more. However, as Jean gains influence with the people, jealousy grows within the court. The king's evil advisors now seek to destroy Jean. It's only a matter of time before they succeed in poisoning the king's mind. Jeanne must hurry to fulfill her mission. Paris, the jewel of France, has been under English tyranny for decades, and French patriots trapped within the city are eager to escape. We are now marching on Paris, hoping that the reinforcements we have been promised will arrive in time. Tragedy. As the refugees fled into the chateau of Compiègne, Jeanne was trapped outside. Burgundian soldiers knocked her from her horse and paraded around with their prisoner. None of us can sleep, knowing our precious Jeanne of Arc languishes in a Burgundian prison. The soldiers stare at the uncaring sky, condemning themselves for being unable to save her, for being unable to save France. Paris was the first major defeat ever dealt to our army. Had the king sent the promised reinforcements, we would have captured the city. Now, it is France's darkest hour. July 14, Bordeaux. No Joan of Arc. A rich world made empty and poor. The English put her on trial as a heretic. Jean's mind was as sharp as her sword, and she avoided all the cunning verbal traps of her prosecutors. In the end, Jean would not renounce her mission. The English found her guilty and burned her at the stake. But her death is not in vain. La Pucelle is the rallying cry as peasant and noblemen alike take arms. My army is an army of the people, and even without the king, we are poised to strike at the English stronghold of Castillon. A victory at Castillon will crush the English pretensions in France forever. Should I die in this battle, I die for the Maid of Orleans. I die as a patriot of France. A century of English toil, blood, and victories was reversed in a little over a year by a teenage girl. The 100 Years' War has ended. Even more importantly, Jean's acts reignited a sense of French nationalism. Peasants and nobles alike no longer belong to lords and kings, but to France herself. We will not let Jean be forgotten. Already statues and stained glass portraits have been commissioned in hundreds of towns and cities throughout France. Her verdict of guilt was rightfully reversed, and eventually Jeanne of Arc was beatified as a saint. Sometimes the outcome of history is determined by strength of arms, other times by happenstance. But in 15th century France, history was determined by the will of a young girl, the only person in history to command the armies of an entire nation at the age of 17.
Passed down to you by Cuauhtémoc, eagle warrior of Tenochtitlan. An omen appeared above the forest, the shape of an ear of corn, but blazing like daybreak. It seemed to bleed fire, drop by drop, like a wound in the sky. I am a warrior, not a priest, and knew not what to make of such a sign. I consulted with the seers and magicians to see if another great war was coming, but they answered only in riddles.
The gods want more sacrifice, was their answer.
That was always their answer.
Much of our empire of rainforests and volcanoes has been conquered in the name of sacrifice. The magicians tell us that we must make a sacrifice every single day for the sun to continue to rise. It took the relay teams 2 full days to carry my message the 200 miles to our city of Tenochtitlan. After 2 more days, my uncle, Montezuma, Emperor of the Aztecs, sent his reply. Montezuma's priests foretold that the god Quetzalcoatl might soon return from his long exile. How else to explain the omen? Montezuma ordered my warriors to increase their efforts to consolidate the rainforest between our lands and those of our enemies. We must establish control over 4 shrines that are sacred to Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. Because the Aztec Empire is mighty and constantly expands, we have made many enemies. We must defend these shrines from our enemies in order to prepare for Quetzalcoatl's eventual return. My warriors had captured the shrines and defeated the Xochomilco and Tlatelolco. We made the long journey back to Tenochtitlan, laden with gifts for Emperor Montezuma, jade, feathers, and of course, prisoners. The sheer vastness of our city on the lake seemed staggering after having been in the rainforest for so many days. Emperor Montezuma lives in the most sumptuous rooms of the palace with his wives and concubines. While we spoke, he drank frothing chocolate from a golden cup. Musicians played their drums and flutes, and masked women danced. When my uncle, Montezuma, first ascended the Great Pyramid many years ago to become emperor, there was a great celebration. Yet now, some question his leadership. He sometimes makes decisions slowly, and rarely does he lead the warriors into combat. Montezuma's priests informed us that Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, would soon return to Tenochtitlan to reclaim his kingdom. Since I helped prepare for his coming, I was given a new obsidian macana and promoted to the rank of Jaguar warrior. There was more feasting and dancing that night. The air was heavy with perfume. But I noticed as I walked down the steps of the Emperor's palace that the omen still hung heavily over the lake, spraying sparks over the midnight sky. So says Cuauhtémoc, Jaguar warrior of Tenochtitlan. Passed down to you by Cuauhtémoc, Jaguar warrior of Tenochtitlan. The gods were still uneasy, for that same year, another omen appeared. The temple of the demon Huitzilopochtli burst suddenly into flame, although it was made of stone. When the people hurried to pour water on the fire, it burned with even greater violence. I asked our emperor, Montezuma, what we needed to do to appease the gods. His haughty priests made the predictable reply. The Aztec Empire needed more prisoners. The sun god and the rain god and even the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, were angry deities that required sacrifice. Our city-state of Tenochtitlan is allied with two others, together composing the Triple Alliance. Montezuma intended for the Triple Alliance to attack our longtime enemies, the Tlaxcala. I sent the traditional shield, arrows, and cloaks to the Tlaxcala, declaring to them that they would soon be attacked. Then we marched out into the forests, our jaguar and eagle banners ready to clash with the heron banners of the Tlaxcala. Birds in the rainforest canopy took to the sky, eager to be away from the violence that was to come. First messengers to arrive in Tenochtitlan told of mountains or towers that floated on the sea. Each story told to Montezuma was more fantastic than the last. They could fire stone balls, shooting sparks, and raining fire that could crack open weapons. Huge deer with no antlers carried these gods on their backs. Their swords were iron, their bows were iron, their shields were iron, their clothes were iron. Surely, this was the return of Quetzalcoatl. Montezuma heard these reports with growing alarm as he shifted nervously on the Iquipali, his legless throne. He ordered expensive gifts to be sent to the new arrivals in the hopes that Quetzalcoatl would spare Montezuma when the feathered serpent came to Tenochtitlan. He has come back, Montezuma whispered to me. He seeks his place on the throne, for that is what he promised when he departed. I held my weapons tightly but said nothing. How could I challenge the word of our emperor? So says Cuauhtémoc, Jaguar warrior of Tenochtitlan. Passed down to you by Cuauhtémoc, Jaguar warrior of Tenochtitlan. Another omen. The lake around the great city of Tenochtitlan rose and boiled. It foamed until it washed against the houses of the city, sweeping many of them into the lake. I accompanied our dignitaries to meet with the new arrivals. We journeyed towards the coast, through the lands of our enemies, the Tlaxcala. When we emerged from the forest, the strangers welcomed us, although they kept their weapons nearby. I told them that we were Aztecs, representatives of the great Montezuma. Their leader said that his people were Spanish, and he named himself Cortés, although he seemed pleased when we referred to him as Quetzalcoatl. Although their armor and animals seemed otherworldly, they did not seem like gods to me. We presented Cortés gifts of finest cotton and plumes of bird feathers, but he seemed more interested in the gold ornaments. He asked again and again if there was more gold to be found in Tenochtitlan. By now, Cortés had advanced all the way to the lands of the Tlaxcala. There was initial warfare made between Tlaxcala and the Spanish. However, when Cortés heard stories about the size of Tenochtitlan and the numbers of our brave Aztec warriors, he suggested that the Spanish and Tlaxcala join forces and attack the Aztecs. Although the Aztec warriors fought well that day, my men were frightened by the beasts that the Spanish rode into combat and by the noise of their exploding weapons. Although we had survived the attack, I thought it best to withdraw towards Tenochtitlan and share with Emperor Montezuma all that we had learned. I do not know if my uncle, Montezuma, was being cowardly or merely trying to preserve us from the wrath of the gods, but he sent more gifts to Cortés, along with an invitation to visit our great city as his personal guest. I was there when Montezuma met Cortés on one of the causeways leading into our great city. The Spanish had evidently never seen anything like Tenochtitlan, and they stared in wonder at the brightly colored markets and pyramids rising out of a man-made island in the middle of gigantic Lake Texcoco. Some of the Spanish soldiers asked whether it was all a dream, the first glimpse of things never heard, seen, or dreamed before. Montezuma led Cortés at the top of the Great Pyramid, where he pointed out the various canals and neighborhoods of the city. But Cortés was mostly interested in gold ornaments and helped himself to any which he encountered. I was no longer convinced that this man was Quetzalcoatl. So says Cuauhtémoc, jaguar warrior of Tenochtitlan. Passed down to you by Cuauhtémoc, prisoner of Tenochtitlan. The next omen we did not see, but heard the voice of a weeping woman who cried in the night that she could not hide her children. Indecision plagued Emperor Montezuma. Was this man Quetzalcoatl, or was he just a man? As the emperor brooded, the citizens grew restless. Cortés kept a close watch on the emperor, and soon Montezuma became a prisoner in his own palace. Thus did the Spanish take Tenochtitlan without a siege. The Spanish collected all of the gold they could find. They were not interested in our art or ornaments, but merely melted down the gold for return to Spain. They also outlawed any further sacrifice to the gods, and when the priests protested, they were killed. The citizens and warriors of Tenochtitlan were enraged. We knew, even if our emperor did not, that these men were not gods. Riots broke out in the marketplaces and at the palace. And when Montezuma himself appeared on the walls, urging the Aztecs to be at peace, the people threw stones at him. It was time to remove these so-called gods from Tenochtitlan. The Spanish called it La Noche Triste, which meant the night of sorrows in their language. At first, the Spanish barricaded themselves in our homes and palaces, but we continuously attacked their quarters. With stones, slings, and arrows, we drove the Spanish and Tlaxcalans through the streets of Tenochtitlan and across the 3 bridges, or over the walls into Lake Texcoco. Thousands died. Those Spanish that were not killed by macanas or javelins were drowned by the weight of the treasure they refused to leave behind. Tenochtitlan lay in ruin, but the city was ours again. Many brave Aztec warriors died that night as well, including noble Montezuma. The Spanish claimed that our own people had killed him with thrown stones. Thus, it was a night of sorrows for us as well. So says Cuauhtémoc, defender of Tenochtitlan. Passed down to you by Cuauhtémoc, Emperor of Tenochtitlan. The death of Montezuma only served to further inflame the fury of my people. I planned to lead the attack personally against the Spanish. That is as it should be, Cuauhtémoc, the priests told me, for you are now our emperor. I took my place on the Ikipali throne, and the headdress of the emperor was placed upon my head. A
crown is never a comfortable thing to wear. Cortés had still not made it far from Tenochtitlan, for the Spanish were weighted down with our stolen gold. As they fled around the shores of the lake, my warriors pursued them from canoes. I sent additional warriors by land, for it was obvious now that Cortés was attempting to flee back to the safety of his allies in Tlaxcala. We caught up with the Spanish on the north side of Lake Texcoco. I hoped that the surviving Spanish on the edge of the lake could see as their captured comrades were dragged up the steps of the Great Pyramid. Perhaps they would then understand why we feared the wrath of the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl. Perhaps they would know fear as well. With the fighting subsided, there was much work to be done. Our city has suffered much from the Spanish occupation and the fighting in the streets. The priests set out repairing the temples, for the Spanish had cast down the idols that we had placed there. We began a celebration to give thanks to the gods when a great plague struck Tenochtitlan. Many of our people became helpless and could only lie on their beds. Many others died. We did not know if the gods were still unhappy with us, or if this was some weapon unleashed by the Spanish. Regardless, if Cortés returned, he would find a much weakened city. I could not let that happen. So says Cuauhtémoc, Emperor of Tenochtitlan. Passed down to you by Cuauhtémoc, Emperor of Tenochtitlan. The Spanish will return soon. I had hoped that Cortés would continue fleeing back from whence he came, but he stopped to regroup at Tlaxcala. I imagine that he could not stand the thought of returning to Spain while we still had treasuries of gold hidden from him. Still dreaming of gold and glory, the Spanish pledged themselves to another assault on Tenochtitlan. In Tlaxcala, Cortés constructed many warboats on dry land. Then he had the craft broken down and carried through the rainforest, only to be rebuilt on Lake Texcoco. He knows that my Aztec warriors can defend the bridges leading into Tenochtitlan, but we are vulnerable from the water. I called the warriors to one final battle. The priests attempted to encourage the troops by calling upon the Aztecs to defend their ancient gods and their glorious city. They sent up smoke signals to declare that the Aztecs were ready for war as I climbed the steps of the great temple and sounded the shell trumpet. Tenochtitlan would be under siege soon, and the brave Aztecs would die before we would see her captured. Not so long ago, some 500,000 people called Tenochtitlan home. It is difficult to recall that this smoking ruin was once an endless city. Yet, we will rebuild. We created this island upon which our city and temple stand, and we can do it once more. The Aztec Empire has endured its greatest challenge, yet more Spanish may come in the future. I am not certain there is a place for us in this new world. I could ask the gods for a hint of the future, but no doubt that would lead to more sacrifice. I think there has been enough death for now. My people composed a poem to commemorate this great war that we have survived, and yet perhaps still not won. Broken spears lie in the roads. We have torn our hair in our grief. The houses are roofless now, and their walls are red with blood. So says Cuauhtémoc, Emperor of Tenochtitlan.
The steady splashing as the oars of 200 ships strike the water drowns out all other sound. The most powerful fleet ever assembled by Don Juan of Austria and his allies in Venice sails under the burning light of dawn towards a final encounter with the Ottoman Turks. The Turkish army has greatly expanded its empire, adding North Africa and Mesopotamia to the Turkish holdings in Anatolia, but has finally been turned back by a staunch defense of Hungary. Undaunted, the Turks turned their attention to the Mediterranean, where they intended to break the Christian naval powers of Venice and Spain. Now, 230 rowed galleys and 6 heavy galleasses lumber into the Bay of Lepanto to meet the 270 galleys of the Turkish fleet. The ships draw up with scarcely 5 miles separating the distance between them. A storm of arrows darkens the sky, and the drone of splashing oars is finally drowned out by the thunder of cannon. The heavy Venetian galleasses broke through the Turkish lines and trampled over the smaller ships of the Turks. But there were too few of the galleasses to win the battle on their own. The Spanish and Venetians attempted to grapple and board the Turkish ships, where the superior experience and weapons of the Christian marines could be brought to bear. As the day wore on, the Turkish juggernaut began to run out of steam. Scores of Turkish galleys were dashed on the rocks, and others sank to the bottom of the bay. Less than 50 Turkish ships survived the battle. Lepanto was not the climax of the conflict between the Christians and the Turks on the Mediterranean, but it was a turning point. The Turks had difficulty rebuilding their fleet back to its former size, while the Christians continued to update their fleets with the latest technological advancements, ensuring a decisive military advantage for further encounters on the high seas. The ships slide through a mirror-flat ocean, stained red with spring seaweed. Columns of rock, improbably draped with pine trees, tower out of the mist. The men on the ships watch silently as the samurai prowl the deck above. They will make land near Kyoto, and their lord, Hideyoshi, will lead the siege of the city of 10,000 shrines. Within Kyoto, revolutionaries hold prisoner Lord Nobunaga, the man who would unify Japan. The islands of Japan remain a patchwork of bickering samurai warlords who still settle conflicts with ritualized duels. Nobunaga seeks to forge a single Japan, dragging the provincial samurai into the modern era. Like his master Nobunaga, Hideyoshi wins his battles by volleys of muskets, fully exploiting the firearms recently introduced by Portuguese sailors. Hideyoshi intends no bargaining. He will demand once for Nobunaga's release, and then storm the city. Kyoto paid dearly for Nobunaga's death, and in the end, Hideyoshi was able to accomplish what his mentor could not. By 1590, Japan was a unified country. Great though it was, this accomplishment did not satisfy Hideyoshi, who then set about on an ambitious plan to conquer China and Korea. Japan was not free of conflict, as civil wars continued to rise and fall for many years. However, the Ieyasu family, former allies of Hideyoshi, continued to rule Japan as shogun until the 19th century. The haze of spent gunpowder hangs over the gravel-strewn beach, confusing the seabirds that nest on the rocky outcroppings of Shinhai Bay. As soon as the winds of the eastern sea disrupt the cloud, the Japanese Navy will return, cannons blazing at the sea walls and what remains of the Korean fleet. Although the army has so far managed to repel any of the samurai that have waded ashore, it is only a matter of time before the Japanese are victorious. The last hope for the Korean Navy is an innovative commander named Yi Sun-shin. Admiral Yi is constructing a secret weapon, a ship with iron armor that can withstand the Japanese cannon and a spiked hull to repel boarders. He calls these ships Kobuksan, or turtle ships. If Admiral Yi can ready his fleet of turtle ships in time, then the Koreans stand a chance of defeating the Japanese. On the other hand, if he's too late, The Japanese were unable to establish a base on either China or Korea. Therefore, all supplies and reinforcements had to come from the Japanese islands themselves. Once Admiral Yi destroyed the Japanese navy, the samurai armies were isolated from supply, and the invasion ended. Yi Sun-shin died in the battle, but the Japanese commander Hideyoshi died soon after, and with him, the lust for Japanese conquest. The possibility of a Japanese empire in Eastern Asia in the 16th century died under the guns of slow but deadly armored Korean warships.